Hey YouTube, Believing Better here. This is part 2 to the Schneider video that I've put out there. If you've just looked this up and found this video, don't watch it until you've watched part 1. Enjoy.
I guess in terms of military engineering, the Rock of Gibraltar was tunneled out centuries ago by the British. And even going back further than that, the ancient Egyptians did a lot of tunneling thousands of years ago in Egypt. So the provenance of underground tunneling for a wide variety of purposes goes way back in human history.
Lies Cappadocia in central Turkey. Here, wind and water have sculpted strange shapes out of the soft volcanic rock. Rock which ancient peoples once turned into small primitive dwellings. In more recent years, the site has seen the construction of more modern structures. But in 1963, a simple home renovation in the town of Derinkuyu led to an extraordinary discovery when a cave wall was opened, revealing a passageway to an underground city thousands of years old and more than 280 feet deep.
I've been there on multiple occasions, and it's incredible because there's 13 stories that go deep into the ground with ventilation shafts and 15,000 little shafts that bring air to even the deepest of levels. Incredibly, the number of rock rooms that were found could hold over 20,000 men, women, and children. There was even evidence of religious centers, storerooms, wine presses, and stables for livestock.
Oh, Derinkuyu would have been a massive undertaking for anyone, even in modern times, with modern equipment. But in those days, it would have been stupendous. Equal to the pyramids. At Derinkuyu, because of the softness of the stone, you had to be very careful that you provided enough pillar strength to support the floors above. Otherwise, you'd have catastrophic cave-ins. Surprisingly, there's no evidence of any catastrophic cave-ins, so they were apparently extremely clever and knew their material. We're talking deep antiquity. It is mind-boggling to understand how they could have done this. Perhaps they had help from some other civilization.
But just who built this massive underground city? And what mysterious force drove them to live underground?
Why would people want to live deep underground in these weird caverns like that? It seems kind of scary.
But what you really get is in the 20th century, where the Nazis and their predecessors, which was called the Thule Society, which was a kind of a mystical sect that the Nazis really drew a lot out of in forming their own ideology. The Thule Society was very interested in Tibetan myths about openings into the earth that describes this idea of deep underground tunnels, bases, crisscrossing the world. And since this was a Tibetan idea, we have to assume that the Nazis themselves were familiar with this idea as well. So the idea in the Tibetan tradition, from what I have understood about it, is that there are different races below the surface of the earth, including reptoid or reptilian races that are supposedly from other worlds. I'm not making this up. This is right out. In fact, I do recall in the source that I read in the 50s that supposedly came from Tibet, that they believe these reptoid races came from Venus, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, as most people listening know, the surface temperature of Venus is something like 900 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm really dubious about race living here. Nonetheless, this is part of the tradition.
In more modern times, in the early to mid-20th century, you had the French, of course, who constructed the so-called Maginot Line in eastern France to guard against German invasion. Well, the German invasion happened anyway, and the Maginot Line was not a significant military factor in World War II. The Germans themselves during World War II, and also the Japanese, did a huge amount of underground excavation and construction. There was a military civil engineering organization in the Third Reich called the Todt Organization, T-O-D-T, and it was named after Fritz Todt. Fritz Todt was a brilliant civil engineer. He was the father of the German Autobahn system. During the World War II period, Adolf Hitler asked Fritz Todt to lend his engineering expertise to the military program of the Third Reich, which he did. He established an engineering agency which was called the Todt Organization. Now, Fritz Todt died in a plane crash in 1942 at the height of World War II. And one of his deputies named Xaver Dorsch, Xaverdorsch, took over control of the agency. And one of the things that Hitler tasked Xaver Dorsch specifically was to embark on an accelerated program of construction of massive deep underground bases for industrial production, for industrial manufacturing in support of the Third Reich's war effort, which he did. However, the war brought an end to that. So after the war, when the Allies, including the Americans, flooded into German-occupied Europe and into Germany itself, they discovered these underground facilities. And the Americans took Xaver Dorsch into detention. And he was actually in American prisoner of war camps for at least a couple of years. The United States Army extensively debriefed Xaver Dorsch. I have a couple of those debriefing documents that he wrote out. I assume that there was a great deal more that I didn't get my hands on and can't, because quite a lot of what happened during and after World War II remains classified to this day. However, I did find a couple of Project Paperclip memos from 1947 that specifically requested Xaver Dorsch by name to be brought to the United States to work on the United States military's underground plant construction program. But he did have a career after World War II. The American military certainly was well aware of who Xaver Dorsch was and his expertise. In his day, he was probably the preeminent authority on underground base construction, whether in Germany or in the United States. And so his services were definitely requested by the United States military after the war, and I suspect that he did come to the United States, but he had a much lower public profile than Wernher von Braun, because what the underground base construction program is a very highly secretive and highly secure program that continues to this day. After the war, the United States military embarked on an almost frantic program of deep underground military construction, which continues to this day, and actually my research indicates it continues under sea as well, with underwater bases and tunnels. Lloyd Dusha, the Deputy Director of Engineering and Construction for the United States Army Corps of Engineers, gave a talk at a civil engineering conference at MIT in 1987, where he very plainly spoke about the program of underground construction that the United States military embarked on at the close of World War II. They've never stopped. And in the process of that speech, Duchamp said point blank that the United States military has made underground structures complex, sophisticated underground structures that he cannot discuss publicly, but that are very interesting. So there's no question that the secret underground bases do exist. The United States military has them. Other countries have them as well. And by the way, it's not